1848 they had a meeting in Seneca Falls, New York.
My name is Colleen Bowles. I was born in 1955. I graduated from college in 1977 and graduated from law school in 1980, and I've been a lawyer with the federal government my entire career. The late 1960s was really the civil rights movement. The war in Vietnam was becoming less popular as you went to the late 1960s, early 70s, and of course the civil rights movement was really front and center in the United States. It was the late 60s was, of course, the assassination of Martin Luther King, the assassination of Robert Kennedy, and the Chicago 1968 convention with huge riots in 1968. And it was really after that, as the civil rights movement was going on, that then the women's movement kind of took off in the late 60s and throughout the 70s in terms of my experience. Well, I was in high school in 1972 when the Equal Rights Amendment was first introduced, and graduated from high school in 1973, and then in college, after that. So just the whole experience of the women's movement becoming more prominent, more of an issue, women protesting for equal rights, equal pay was something that I was very familiar with in my late teens and my 20s. I don't think I did take part in any events, but I was certainly influenced by the women's movement in that I planned to have a career, and I think that was influenced by the women's movement and by recognizing that my own mother didn't have the same opportunities that I had. I did read books by feminists. I think mostly it was an influence of people like Gloria Steinem, who was out making speeches. The National Organization for Women was becoming more vocal, prominent, and as a young woman in my 20s, I was very much influenced by that and believed that the women had to stand up for their rights, and just as African Americans had stood up for their rights in the mid to late 60s, that now it was the women's turn to make sure that they were paid, given equal pay, and treated equally.
They got sway on all kinds of issues like alcohol.
I don't think I experienced any overt sexism. I was able to get into college, and there were probably by the time, and law school, and by the time I finished law school in 1980, I think about a third of my class were women by that time. I went to law school at William & Mary. But there was that certainly in the course of my career, early in my career, and in law school, there was sometimes subtle sexism, and that women were still viewed by many people as being sort of the weaker sex, as being rather fragile.
Danger, Princess Diane, Janis Joplin, she died, Harriet Tubman, Yoko Ono, Princess Leia.
So, but one reason that I entered the federal government is because I thought that the federal government was more friendly and open to women staff lawyers as opposed to private firms and private corporations. So, and I did find that when I entered the federal government that I did have more women colleagues. Not a lot. All of my supervisors were men. But I did think that being in the federal government, I was less likely to encounter any discrimination or sexism. I think at that time I do recall, you know, I did have all male supervisors. It was expected that if a woman got married, that she would take her husband's name, so that so there were little subtle things like that that were just really the way people viewed women that was different from the way it is today. And I went down to New Orleans, and I remember distinctly that the judges, who were all rather elderly, the chief judge, you know, said to me something along the lines of, you know, as I got up to present my argument, now if you feel weak or you feel faint or anything and you need to sit down, you know, please feel free to do that. And I thought that was something that was a little bit, you know, they were doing that because because I was a woman, and they were trying to, you know, realize that I may be not quite as strong as a man in the same situation. A shirt that I got in the early 1970s that I wore that says Equal Rights Amendment, ERA, and then it says ERA, yes indeed. This was the colors, green and white. And I remember wearing this shirt in my early 20s, and that was really, and that was because I was a big supporter of the Equal Rights Amendment, and it went on for a long time, because as I think it was introduced in 1972 when I was still in high school, but all of these states then went about having to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, and a certain number of states needed to ratify, and there was a time limit. I think it was 1979 when all of the states had to, that was the deadline by which all of the states had to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. And so it didn't come about, and we fell a few states short. And so there was, you know, a lot of speeches, a lot of leadership among women like Gloria Steinem, the NOW organization, in favor of lobbying for passage of the Equal Rights Amendment. You know, she was very vocal, just as vocal as advocates of ERA and women's rights, but you know, of course I didn't believe in anything that she was saying, and she basically took the view that women should stay at home, that they needed to be supportive of their husbands and support their husbands in their husbands' work. And she thought that she made all sorts of outrageous claims that the Equal Rights Amendment would bring about all these terrible things that would happen, like, you know, we'd have unisex bathrooms, and that would be terrible. Well, I thought she was a nut. She was a nut. Certainly, Roe versus Wade was a Supreme Court decision that was that came out was issued in 1973, which was the year that I graduated from high school. That found that women had a private right to have an abortion should they choose to do so. So it was the first decision of the Supreme Court that was that upheld a woman's right to choose. Well, I think things have changed a lot. I mean, I think that we're much closer to having equal pay for women. We're still not there, but I think we're a lot closer. I think women are taken much more seriously in the workplace now. When I was growing up, you know, my mother was a secretary. What was available to her in the way of a profession was either being a secretary, being a teacher, and that was about it. But for the most part, women were supposed to stay at home and take care of the children. So I think that it has changed a lot. There's a lot less discrimination, but I think there is still some work to be done. All of these movements kind of fed on one another. You know, the civil rights movement in the mid-'60s, late '60s, then was that spawned the women's rights movement, and then all the successes that the women's rights movement had then spawned the gay rights movement. So, and each group, you know, encountered discrimination along the way and needed to rely on leaders who would be out there to speak the truth. So, and of course we're still working on these movements, women's movement, certainly gay rights movement. The Equal Rights Amendment, while it wasn't ultimately passed, I mean, it had a huge impact because it went on for years trying to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed, and because of that, it kept the women's movement alive, and because of that, women were able to get entry into, you know, the field of law, for example, and into businesses and so forth, and then through time, you know, gain experience so they could get upper level positions. I feel really fortunate to have been in my teens and 20s during the time of the women's rights movement and the civil rights movement, because I feel like it has made me more aware and sensitive to individuals' rights, to the rights of disabilities, that as disabled people have tried to gain equality, and gays as well, gaining equality. So I really feel fortunate, and it made you know, a huge impact on my life.